Once again, my name is Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. With me from halfway around the world is Jaap Singh, and he'll be introducing himself in a second. We're going to be talking about shifting left into the mind of the developer. That is our August topic for the DevSecOps bunch. If this is new to you, this is our monthly session. We've had a great year so far. We have many more great sessions going on this year. I will remind you that we will be recording today's webinar. We will also be running a live Q&A at the end as we go. Should you have questions that you would like to ask of us, please enter them using the Q&A tab in your Zoom webinar controls. And at the end, we will go through the questions that have been asked. Any questions we don't get to, we'll follow up afterwards. With that, I would love to introduce us today. So Jaap, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. So my name is Jaap Singh. I work for SecureCodeWarrior. I love talking about developer security and developer training. Like Brian mentioned, he's probably sick of me talking about it by now. I started my life as a developer not so long ago. I think almost, maybe 10 years ago, I was a developer. Started to realize the perils of software security and how bad things can get if you don't take that into account. When I joined SecureCodeWarrior, I was a developer as well. And since then, I've had the privilege of working with lots of organizations, helping them build their developer upskilling programs.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And so I'm Brian Reed, the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. I've got 15, 20 years of mobile dating back to BlackBerry, when BlackBerry was the innovative and secure mobile platform, moving into the iOS and Android world with Apple, Google, and lots of things along the way. I spend a lot of time working with organizations on their mobile strategy, everything from the application innovation side to security and protection side. And I'm doing a lot of DevSecOps consulting these days, helping organizations evolve their pipelines. And that's what actually led to this year's DevSecOps Bunch series, because really it's all about how do I deliver high quality software fast? How do I have security built in? How do I make sure my team has the knowledge and skills I need to be successful? So our agenda today is going to cover two key items, which is secure by design and trust but verify. They're two pillars in a successful DevSecOps pipeline. As I said earlier, we'll be providing reference resources at the end. So there's more learning materials and reference materials for all of you and some additional events coming up. We are going to have fun with some trivia and prizes at the end as well. So please do stay until the end. You could win some awesome stuff. I would suggest you pay attention as well, because the trivia is going to be related to content that we're going to cover today. And of course, we have open Q&A. Please use the Q&A tab on your screen. And so with that, quick intro from NowSecure for those who are not familiar. NowSecure started 12 years ago as a mobile forensics company, and we literally wrote the book on mobile forensics. So we have some of the world's greatest mobile security engineers and researchers on staff. We've dedicated ourselves to helping organizations deliver secure mobile apps faster. We're really on a mission to save the world from unsafe mobile apps. We focus on pen testing. We focus on application security testing software for DevOps pipelines. And so on and so forth. And we work with some of the world's largest brands, as you see here. And what they all have in common is that mobile apps are critical to their business, and they recognize that either for their own reasons or industry regulatory reasons or for brand quality reasons or shareholder value reasons, security and privacy are a critical part of delivering their innovative mobile application experiences. And so they turn to us to help make sure that happens in spades. If you're on the security side, you might know Frida and Radari. Those were created by some of our researchers. But for the developer folks on the line today, it's automated software that runs in the background that makes it really easy for you to fix the bugs we find. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jaap to tell us about SecureCodeWarrior.
Absolutely. So SecureCodeWarrior, we're a tech-based startup based in Sydney, Australia. We now have a presence in the US as well. Our vision at SecureCodeWarrior has always been to inspire developers to embrace a preventative secure coding approach that enables every team to ship quality software with confidence. We work with quite a few customers in the banking sector. So there's a lot of compliance needs there. There's a lot of technology code that exists in banks now. Then we also transcend over to finance and insurance, telecom and technology, and pretty much everything under the sun. We're often surprised, even something like agricultural equipment has so much code now that they need to train their developers to make sure that the code that runs in your tractors or, in your other household appliances that you might have, that also needs to be secure, and we make sure we don't have any attack from hackers.
So we're going to, as is customary every month in this series, we like to ask 2 polls using the Zoom polling feature. So your first poll is really just basically, what is your role, right? So this is really so that Jaap and I can understand the audience that's here, and so you yourselves can understand who your peer group is on today's webinar, and we'll use that information to steer today's conversation. So the poll will stay open for about 30 seconds. So looks like we have development, looks like we have QA, looks like we have executives, and we have no security people. That's pretty funny. With that, we're going to focus on developers and executives more today in our talk track. And for those of you who are others, thank you for joining us. I'm sure there's lots of other roles that could be in your organization. So we're going to go ahead and end the poll, please, Earl, and let's move to the second poll. The second poll here really is about understanding. We want to jump over to poll 2. Yeah, the really second poll is about understanding what types of security training and enablement you have running in your organization today. This is one where you can make multiple choices, right? So do you have courseware, or are you using hackathons? Are you doing learning or training in the issue tickets and bug tickets? Are you doing coaching and mentoring, classroom training? There is always nothing at all, which frankly is part of the world I came from originally, pre-BlackBerry days, before I developed my appreciation for mobile security. And there may be some other things that you're doing as well. So we'd love to have you all select what you're doing. And it looks like we have a few people selected here. So courseware, hackathons, coaching and mentoring, classroom training, lots of different things people are doing. Looks like universally there's some kind of courseware going on, which is really great. We're excited for you to be going down that path. So Earl, if we close up the poll, I will go ahead and get us rolling forward. Thank you. Well, today it's about speed, right? So when I started in security in the BlackBerry days, it was about portable security, meaning I want my email anywhere in the world, but it better be bulletproof because we're going to use it in government and banks and all the rest. Fast forward some 15 years later, and it's now all about building and delivering mobile applications at the speed the business needs. And whatever your business is and wherever you're trying to go, speed is really what matters. And it really does take a team to get us there, right? So when we think about race cars like mobile application development teams, there's a lot of different stakeholders and roles, from development, security, QA, design, you have PUMs, you have product managers. You have other stakeholders too, for example, executive management, the business owner, and so on and so forth. So how do all these stakeholders work together well to make the race car run fast, i.e. to get the applications built and out the door quickly to meet the market requirements, but also meet the safety and security and privacy requirements of the organization? And at the center of all is really the development team. You know, they're the ones driving the car. They're the ones that are building these really great applications that are driving business value, whether it's putting in augmented reality or putting in track your thing or leveraging point-to-point experiences or cloud-based services, geolocation, all of the sensors that might live in a mobile device. There's some really great innovation going on, and it's all at the hands of the developer. So how do we help the developer race the car faster, i.e. how do we help the development team build and deliver high quality apps faster, is really the mission of many teams in the conversation we're having today. Now, the reality is, when we think of it with a slice of mobile, the latest internet traffic data from ComScore shows that about 69 or 70% of all internet data and all digital time spent on a thing, be it a device or a laptop, is actually on mobile. And so mobile is now ascending as the primary interface for many users for many kinds of applications. Mobile banking has grown dramatically. With the advent of COVID, mobile retail and mobile delivery services have literally exploded into the marketplace. The challenge that we all face here is the reality that our benchmarking of the millions of apps in iTunes and Google Play shows that some 85% of mobile apps have security vulnerabilities and 70% leak GDPR and CCPA. So the reality is that lots of great innovative apps are being delivered, but there's pretty high security and privacy risk in that collection. And what we found is one of the primary blockers to that is the lack of automation. When only 9% of teams have automated tooling that allow them to push a release out in a single day, that's pretty rough. So how do we find a way to help people take advantage of the mobile innovations and do it in a way with security and privacy built in and an easy way to support it? So Jaap, you got some stats here. Why don't you tell us about the skills gap?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is from a primary research that we did in collaboration with the Evans Data Corporation. So we want to try and understand the mindset of the developer, which I know we've got quite a few in the audience today, like Ryan mentioned, development managers and executives. And the idea was to understand what the security culture is like in organizations and what sort of security practices currently exist. And what we found when we look at that developer mindset is, more than 50% of them still define secure coding as using scanning tools as part of the tool chain. But then having said that, what we also get back from them is that the ones that have done good training, that recognize what good training looks like, they also recognize the fact that 70% of them say that good training eliminates code rework or remediation. So some really interesting numbers around if we are to move left into that CI/CD, can we actually start to see improvement? Most developers themselves seem to think so. Now, if we look at what sort of training is currently being done, is it good training? Is it bad training? What we see is that 40% of developers say most of the training that is done in a vacuum. So it might be something that you think of once a year and you say, oh, we're going to do some security training, or we're not going to meet our compliance requirements. That's what most people are doing. Just like we saw in the poll, it looks like courseware or CBT training where you watch lots of videos. That's where a lot of the training is happening as well. It's not very hands-on. It's not very practical, something that developers can leverage. And then also it often seems to be something that just happens ad hoc. It's not something that's baked into the DNA of the development team or the organization. It happens very infrequently if and when you have a compliance requirement or an audit requirement. That's when a lot of the training happens.
So as we think about as I've been kind of alluding to, what destination are we trying to get to here? And it's really about driving quality and velocity in parallel, right? Organizations like Netflix and Facebook are actually able to do, commit, code, commit to build, to test, to release in like 90 minutes. And they can do multiple releases a day, and they can do it with quality built in and get that velocity that they need in the business. And they can do it without the developer friction from the security team on staff. And so what we have found collectively, I think, as Jaap and I were preparing here, is it's really 4 challenges, right? From the quality perspective, there's a simple lack of security skills, and there's a lack of testing coverage. And that's why we have 85% of the apps in the app stores are vulnerable, because there just isn't the skill set nor the testing coverage. And when we look at what holds people back and what slows down velocity is, the lack of testing late in the stage. So instead of, skilling up front and testing as you go, it's testing at the end and finding lots of surprises. But often the remediation delays, maybe you find an issue and it takes the developer days or weeks to understand the issue and figure out how to fix it. So we need to figure out how to not only reduce the security bugs and speed up the testing, but also make it easier for developers when things happen to figure out how to fix things. And if their skills are higher, then there's fewer things to fix, and they can fix the few things that happen faster, right? So all of those things combine to really give us the velocity we're looking for. And so to kind of pull it all together, imagine this world, right? If we kind of imagine the future or what could be in your organization, like many others, is how much friction could you eliminate if you actually set an agreed policy up front for how dev and security are going to work together to make things run faster? Wow, that's a great idea. How many bugs could be prevented by upskilling the development team so that they write better code the first time, so that you get fewer bugs that get caught in testing later? How many delays could be prevented by continuously testing every line of code written every day versus waiting to fix them at the end? And if you find the issue that day, getting it fixed that day or the next day by a skilled developer who has knowledge, wouldn't that really run faster? And how many delays could be, eliminated by embedding context-driven training within the issue ticket so that they could fix them as they go, right? And so this becomes a more harmonized approach if we can think about how we conquer these things. And that's what we're going to talk about today, where, bringing together the teams and thinking about this in a combination of secure by design, meaning security thought, security skills start at the beginning, and trust but verify, which basically means continuous testing as you go, just to make sure that they learn the security and that the code they're writing meets the security and privacy requirements of the business, can really happen. And that's how you get that really fast velocity, which brings the innovation and the friction reduction that everybody really wants. So we see it as knowledge is power, and I'm going to hand it over to Jaap to really get us going. When we think about a software pipeline, it kind of looks like this. And so we have the upskill, the requirements, the code, the commit, the build, the test, the stage, the deploy, right? And as we go through today's conversation, we're going to use a software pipeline picture like this. And as part of that pipeline, right, there's many choices when it comes to getting your business running faster. Training up front and really developing the skills necessary to successfully write your code. That could be training on how to use a development language. That could be training on how to write a good mobile app. That could be training on new code libraries. That could be training on scanning. There's on various types of upskilling. There's lots of training up front. And then there's lots of different kinds of testing approaches. There's lots of different types of coaching approaches, that can come along the path in security in the pipeline. And what we really want to do is have a sort of a begin with the end in mind strategy. And that really why we're starting with upskilling as really the place people should start. Most people start with requirements and design, and they miss that part. And it's very important to not forget that, right? As we shift left to the developer, what you're going to hear today is why not start with the developer as opposed to shift left with the developer. And the furthest left we can shift really is into the mind of the developer. One of the most senior people we have on our customer base, a CTO at a very large company you all would know, basically said that. Notice I said CTO, not CISO, which was the furthest left we in our organizations can do is shift left into the mind of the developer. And that's why they do hackathons and courseware and training and mentoring and advocacy and so on and so forth, is because that's what they want to build into their culture. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jaap to get us going on the secure by design side with some understanding and some best practices for all of us. Over to you, sir.
Cool. Thank you, Brian. See if I can get these Zoom controls working for me. Here we go. Oh, one too many. Here we go. So I thought I'd take everyone on a little bit of a journey if we look at how development and security has worked together. So kind of this concept of, secure by design, trust but verify. I think we've often in security land thought about security as something that we do after the fact. So, let developers do their thing, let them code, let them add the features. We know there's going to be security flaws. We accepted that as an application security community. And we thought, come what may, let them throw code over the wall and we will go and look at that code and we will scan it. We'll put a firewall in place. We'll do all these things and we'll protect that code, right? We'll add these patches, add these bolt-ons. And what that has resulted in the past is there's been very little interaction between developers and application security. They haven't really worked in collaboration. It's always been siloed work environments that they work in. Developers' primary goal has always been to create functional features and create good quality code. And that's what they're judged on. Developers traditionally have not been judged on the security of their code. Whereas application security teams, they're very much aware of the security landscape. They know what is a good code base when it comes from a security standard and what isn't. But it's not often that you would have found security teams giving remediation advice to developers. They can very much talk through the impact of vulnerabilities, how they manifest themselves, but how do you actually remediate them or be able to speak the language of the developer and really explain it to them on their terms? That's been a very difficult conversation. Now, what you find as a result of that is developers would often delay code reviews because they don't want to go through that journey where their releases are just being delayed. It's hard enough being a developer and having very tight deadlines, having to make sure that your code is bug-free, having full test coverage, to then have application security come in and point out all of these mistakes. So as a result, what happens? Bugs get discovered very late, or sometimes even months after public release. That was kind of the standard back in the day. Now, if we look at how that has changed over time, what we find is that that dysfunction still continues today. Not much has changed. The developer mindset very much is, hey, it's a feature. It's not a bug. You know, we're functionally, this is the sort of code that we are creating. And then if you look at security, they come back with a hammer and they say, you shall not pass. Your code has so many bugs. We're going to block your release. That is not a fun experience for anyone. So developers, application security, they're still getting in each other's way. A lot of times developers don't see security as a priority. So even that research that we did very recently with Evan's data, that's what I found. A lot of the times developers think their responsibility is to write good code, and it's security's job to go and scan the code and magically fix all of the bugs that we have. And as a result, what you find is security is just considered far too late in the cycle. And I thought the best way to kind of describe this example will be to use a contrived example to kind of go, how does that work? Like, you know, what is this whole concept of why should we be shifting left or starting left in the mind of the developer? So let's say we want to provide a service that transports stuff from A to B. A really good example of that is from my hometown. We have this civil engineering marvel, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's functionally great. There's thousands of cars that go on it every day, less now with the COVID, but you know, thousands of cars go on it. We've never had any sort of major incidents or major quality issues. It's also very beautiful, works really well, but then also really secure. And if you look at the civil engineering principle, there's a couple of key pillars that comes with civil engineering. Right? It's another stream of engineering similar to software, but it has some very key pillars, and one of them is safety and security. That is a key part of a civil engineer. They don't get to be agile and build a bridge and then they go, oh, oops, we got a bug. We're going to go and patch that. It's too late at that point. So safety has to come first. Now, if we look at software engineering, and again, this is using a very contrived example, but let's say we also build a bridge and we build it in an agile way, what we find is that this is also a bridge, right? Similar to the last one, still transports things from A to B, but it probably isn't the nicest experience from a safety perspective, right? It's going to be fairly difficult for our customers, for our partners to go over this bridge. You very much risk yourself falling in that river. Now, what happens when you add security as an after the fact? And you know, you can hire some great security experts who can absolutely work some magic, or have great engineers who come in afterwards and try to add bolt-ons for security. Is you can make some great strides, you can make some great improvements, just like we see here. This is a much better bridge that you can cross over. It's a bit more friendly. But unfortunately, we will never end up with what we did in that other engineering stream. You can't go from where we started in software engineering and end up with something like the Harbour Bridge. It's just not possible. So if we want that caliber of security, of safety, of function, it really has to be something where we start left, where we start in the mind of the developer, and we make sure that we're doing secure development from the start. We have good coding policies, good standards in place, and the developers that are writing this code are upskilled and they understand how to write good quality secure code. And there's also, for the executives in the room, there's some real good math behind it. If you look at when you find bugs in your development lifecycle, and it doesn't even have to be a security bug, it can just be any sort of bug that you find. If you find it early on, you know, if you find it in your requirements and design phase, or you just prevent it from happening because people are upskilled, they don't make that mistake. Worse is if you find it in production right at the end or post-production, it's 30 times more expensive to fix these vulnerabilities at the end. So how do we do security today? What does that world of developers and application security look like? Well, if we look at our typical SDLC, developers are very, very engaged. They work on their deliverables, they make sure their code is functional. And after that happens, after they've done all of that, they throw it over a wall. And then at that point, regardless of whether you're using CI/CD or it happens in a bit more traditional manual manner, what developers expect is that magical security fairies are going to come, they're going to scan the code, they're going to find all the problems, they're going to fix the insecure code. And every now and then it may or may not bounce back for an annoying hot fix that they have to do to make sure their release goes out on time. And unfortunately, even if we were to follow that model, I think the problem that we have at the moment in today's environment is if you look at an agile team, for every 100 developers that are writing code, whether it's making updates, whether it's writing new lines of code, we typically only have 1 to 3 security people in an organization. So if we were to keep following that model, we would have to hire lots and lots of security people, try and scale that problem, try and fix it. But unfortunately, what we find is that oftentimes security just doesn't have the biggest budget in the room. Development typically has a much bigger budget. Other functions get a budget. Security is really a cost, right? So we try to minimize the budget there so you don't have a whole lot. But let's say if you're someone who thinks security is your utmost priority, you want to make sure that you hire the best experts in the field. You say, hey, you know what? In a hypothetical world, you've got unlimited budget. Well, then we hit the next problem, which is there's just not enough security people in the world to save the day. You're not going to be able to hire and match the amount of new code that is being shipped out by your developers. So just those people just don't exist yet. We're falling behind, we're lagging behind in that security skills journey. Let's say we cross that hurdle and we're able to magically find all these security unicorns and hire them. Well, then we hit the next problem, which is if you look at the skill set of a developer versus a security person, it's completely different. They speak a foreign language to each other. Developers are very much engaged in what functions they should be writing, what APIs are they building. Whereas if you look at security, they're often talking about vulnerabilities, cross-site scripting, SQL injection. They don't talk that same language. A security person is not going to be able to help a developer understand their particular technology stack, their programming language, and be able to provide some tangible remediation advice. That's just not possible. Either you're going to be an expert in security or you're going to be an expert in technology. And technology moves so fast these days that even if you could master one technology, you're not going to be able to keep abreast of everything new that your development teams are doing. So how do we solve that problem? So we know that, the cost to fix that security flaw later in the cycle is high. We can't scale while hiring lots and lots of AppSec people. Well, then what do we do? Well, we can shift left. So, Brian's going to touch on how do we trust and verify. That's super important. We're going to make sure that we have automation in place. So, if you look at mobile apps, if you've only got 9% of teams or 9% of companies that are actually doing automation with their testing, it's just not enough, right? If you don't automate, there's always going to be that manual overhead. It's just not going to let you scale. So we definitely have to do that. But that's only a partial fix. I think ultimately what we have to start to recognize, and this is one of the most difficult things you can do as an application security professional, is address that human element, address that developer team. It's not something we're used to. It's an uncomfortable place for us. We understand our AppSec tools. We understand security policies, processes. We can have that conversation on how to add that into the pipeline. But I think the green field for us, the new conversation to have, is how do we change the mindset of that developer? How do we change the security culture in that developer organization? And that's the conversation we need to start having. We need to start making software security a positive experience for the developers and make it intrinsic as part of your development process. Well, then the next question is, okay, let's say you're bought into that vision and you say, yes, I want to do that. I want to make software security a positive experience for my developers. How would I go about doing that? Well, the first thing is, before you even start writing code, you need to have a minimum baseline skill level that's linked to the risk profile of your organization or of the application that you want developers to work on, and make sure every single developer that you hire actually goes through that journey as part of their onboarding experience. Just like they have to learn other tools of the job, how do we use the build system? How do we make sure that we have proper test coverage? Well, this is another thing that a developer should be learning. What is the minimum level of skill that I need to have to be able to write good quality secure code? And now that will differ by each person or by each team. So if you have a team that's working on a brochureware marketing website, well, maybe they don't need to have the highest level of skill because they're not handling dynamic user input. The risk profile of the application is quite low. But if you have someone that's working on a core platform technology that tracks untrusted user input, maybe they need to have a much higher skill level. when you do pen testing or you do other scanning, you know what sort of issues you get in your applications. You can get ahead of that problem. When you hire that person, you can train them on that particular skill level. So what that allows you to do is maximize the security outcomes every single day, because developers are now switched on and thinking about security 24/7. The other thing you want to be doing is any sort of training that you give to developers has to be tangible. It has to be things that they can use. When developers think about how to improve their code, they're often thinking from the perspective of their programming language or their programming framework. So that's the language we have to speak. So if I'm a developer that codes in Java, or I'm a developer that codes in Kotlin, what are Kotlin specific vulnerabilities or bad coding practices that I need to be aware of? And then, like Ryan mentioned, what the other thing we also want to be doing is make sure that this sort of coaching advice doesn't just stop in the beginning. We upskill and then we totally forget about it. It's this ad hoc thing, or this thing that happens once a year. We continue to apply that through the pipeline. So when you have your tools that tell you these are all the mistakes they're making, well, can we have some contextual advice, remediation advice specific to that developer's programming language and framework? What that's going to ultimately translate to is fewer vulnerabilities that come out of the pipeline. And then even if they do, there's going to be less rework, and the remediation is going to be much, much faster because developers know exactly how to fix it. So what that translates to is this becomes a very core part of your application security strategy. Security-aware developers can be your first line of defense as part of your risk portfolio. There's a lot of things you can do. Brian showed that's the CI/CD pipeline of all the different tactics that you can use. Well, the developers can be that first line of defense. They can be your rock bed that help you ensure that you've got a resilient strategy. How do you know you've got security-aware developers? Well, security-aware developers are aware that when they think of quality code, it doesn't just mean code with good testing coverage or one that has performance impact, but also code that is secure from the start. It's designed really well. And if you're a developer, because you've got a few on the webinar, know for yourself, it's also very useful to build this skill, to be able to flex this muscle, because security-aware developers are highly sought after. They're a cut above the average developer. So in terms of having those lucrative job opportunities, you want to move up the ladder, you want to become a senior engineer, or you want to become a security architect. These are the sorts of skills that you can leverage to try and get those job opportunities. And I'll hand over to Brian at this point to talk about trust but verify.
And here we go. So as we think about what we really just said, right? If I go back to the building the bridge that I thought is an awesome example, is if those weren't trained architects and civil engineers, we'd be in bad shape today, right? So they had the implicit knowledge about how to build that safe bridge. And what we're talking about here is building up the implicit knowledge of the development team to make sure that they're always thinking about or considering security and privacy as part of what they do. Now, when we look at some of the bad stats we talked about earlier, I'll come back to that 85% of App Store apps have security vulnerabilities. You know, when we look at, well, why is that happening? Well, clearly we've just talked about skills gaps in terms of secure development as well as security testing skills. A lot of security people come from web, they come from network, they come from places other than mobile. And so they may not have an understanding of some of the unique things about mobile that are different from a PC or a laptop running a web application. State of the art for web testing is static source code scanning. We know it's high false positives there. It gets even worse on mobile because there's very few scanners that can scan mobile development languages efficiently. And in fact, the false positive rate gets worse on the mobile development languages than it does on the web development languages. Source code scanning only catches about 20% of the actual real world vulnerabilities. We do 600 tests on an application, and less than a quarter of them are actually static-oriented tests. And when we look at the vulnerability data from the App Store benchmarks, where I talked about 85% vulnerability, we find a correlation between whether or not the app has been dynamically tested and the bugs we find. To invert that, most of the bugs we find are found through dynamic testing, not static testing. Manual testing at the end slows us down, doesn't work. And so all of these things effectively slow down the machine. Now, what happens in the race then is either, development basically races past security and the apps go out either with known or unknown vulnerabilities, and the teams catch up to security issues in the backlog when they can in a variety of different ways. Or you wind up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, like British Airways and Under Armour and a lot of other organizations who've been breached over the last couple of years on mobile. So when we look at really how do we want to do this right, well, it all starts with setting policy correctly. Just like you want to establish and upskill your teams, you really should set up mutually agreed policies between the development teams, the QA, and the security teams. QA may or may not be part of the decision-making process on what your security policy is going to be. Now, that policy should include, what is the developer's responsibility? What are the security requirements for the pipeline and for the development team? What's going to be tested by the security team? Developers hate surprises when security suddenly shifts the sands. So how do we make sure that going into it, we know what kind of security is required in the app, but also how security is going to test it on their behalf to truly verify it? There's lots of standards to leverage. If you're on the development side of the house, you may or may not be aware of an organization called OWASP. The MASVS, Mobile App Security Verification Suite guide, and we have a link to that later on, is actually a great guide on how to write a secure application. And then going with it, to go with those security considerations, is a companion document, the MSTG, for the testing people on how to test it. So that's a great place to start in terms of choosing a standard. We do recognize that different applications have different security requirements, right? If you are building a commercial banking app for millions of users, there's a lot of sensitive financial data you need to protect. But if you're building a small application that might, say, schedule a meeting room or manage conference room space, that doesn't need all the severe security requirements in it. Should be safe, but has a different requirement. So think about, in your policy, think about different risk models and use things like tiering in order to group applications and pipelines to be more efficient. With that, of course, you can establish your service level agreements. So it's not just what does security mean or what are the privacy requirements in my pipeline or for my team, but what are the SLAs in terms of the security team doing their testing and the development team doing their remediation, right? All of these things we found with our best performing customers really are a big chunk of reducing friction to get that accelerated pipeline. To put it differently, begin with the end in mind. If everybody's on the same page and you have a common standards-based strategy, then the machine will run faster because everybody's working from the same playbook. Now, as part of Trust But Verify, you need to think about testing mobile apps in the pipeline. And really, continuous testing now is the state of the art. And that basically means you're testing every build every day and providing a fast feedback loop into development. Now, with a SaaS model, you might be testing raw code or scanning code repos or code pulls or code pushes or commits. With binary testing, you actually get SAST, DAST, and IAST, otherwise known as you get a full complement of testing when you test the binary, and you're actually testing the actual binary that was actually compiled with the actual code that runs on a real operating system. And so now you can directly measure the behavior and really understand what's going on. State-of-the-art testing technology allows you to run on real devices, not emulators. And what we find is that emulators miss some 20 to 30% of the security bugs because they're just not the same thing. It's running on the real thing. And of course, for whatever standards you pick to design to in the prior phase, you can test for that. So you can use OWASP or you can use NIAP for federal or whatever things are necessary to align the requirements you had up front with your security policy with the actual testing mechanism. One of the other things that's kind of unique about mobile versus, say, web apps is recognizing that Apple and Google have a say towards the quality of your app before you're allowed to submit it to the app stores. Now, they don't necessarily test for security and privacy requirements as rigorously as a standalone testing program can. There are a number of things that are app store blockers that can slow you down as well. And those can be unforeseen surprises, especially when you have very important targeted release dates. So make sure your testing is testing for things that are known requirements for Apple and Google. When you look at the way NowSecure really focuses on this, we built out 600 standards-based checks, checking for things like standard sensitive data, but also checking for things like app store blockers and compliancy issues and all those other good things. So it's getting a full sort of 360-degree coverage. And what's great about it is it runs autonomously. It plugs directly into the CI/CD and ticketing systems. And by doing that, it basically means that every day you get that continuous testing, kind of like an alarm system in the background continuously monitors, say, your home or your business. But by testing in the background, there's actually no tools to learn. So instead of making a developer learn how to use a new security tool, the continuous testing just runs on the code they commit. And as a result of that, they get feedback from it, but they don't actually have to learn a new tool or a new language or anything else. And there's no deployment requirements. Now, all the tickets, of course, that get generated as a basis of the testing, all the findings that are found then need to be routed back to development to be fixed. And so in this kind of fast feedback loop, now you have automated autonomous testing, you have automated ticket generation, you have no tool for the developer, and the tickets come back in the CI/CD in the ticketing platform they use, whether it's like, whether you're a Azure DevOps shop or a Jenkins and Jira or what have you, GitLab and so forth, it can run that way. Testing the binary is what gives you that high accuracy rate and no false positives. Now, just providing tickets to development doesn't mean you can fix them faster. Jaap made a good point about that earlier, as developers need to know how to fix it. And so including things around embedded development remediation are just as important as providing the right tickets, prioritized in the right way for the developers to address. So tickets and contextual information should include, well, what is the issue? What is the severity? What is the evidence the issue occurred? How do I know it's not a false positive? Should include things like remediation instructions and code samples and links to learning more. Maybe there's a quick video to watch to learn from SecureCodeWarrior how to address it, and so on and so forth. And so what you're actually able to do now is you can upskill the team as we find bugs that indicate lack of security skill and build that right into the workflow or the working loop for the development team as you go. So by accelerating the fix, as well as accelerating the find and upskilling the team, you get a faster pipeline. So we bring it all together, the sort of value prop as we think about the best practices to really run fast pipelines leveraging partners like SecureCodeWarrior and NowSecure, is you get this faster pipeline because all of these steps are now included. I'm upskilling the team. We've got mutually agreed policy. We've got automated continuous testing. We've got tickets with embedded development and remediation that include links to development skill coaching and context. What does that mean? The entire process runs faster. Now your pit crew is able to not only change the tires faster and make the car run faster, but your developers are a lot more efficient. They're writing more better code every day, spending less wasted time. The team is finding fewer bugs because the quality of the code is going up. And when they find those bugs, they're fixing them fast and hopefully not to repeat because they've been retrained or trained or skilled up on those various points. And that gives you the throughput, gives you the feedback, and ultimately the outcome we're all looking for is higher quality software at scale. So to bring it all together, secure by design and trust but verify is really the goal. And we hope that you found today valuable in enabling these two things to come together, right? Shift left into the mind of developers, start with upskilling, build continuous testing in, build continuous learning into your pipelines as part of all of this. And that's really where you get to those faster feedback loops that lead in turn to higher quality software being delivered at DevOps speeds or a higher velocity in your business ultimately. So with that, we'd like to kind of bring together some customer success stories. Both SecureCodeWarrior and NowSecure have some really great experiences working with our clients. We want to share some of those stories. So I'll hand it over to Jaap to tell us a story here about one of your clients.
Sounds good. So this is about a tier 1 US financial institution, which I think a lot of people in the audience would know about. They wanted to upskill their developers on security. They wanted to do it quickly. They wanted to scale to hundreds of developers and reduce the costs associated with fixing these vulnerabilities. That was really the ultimate goal. And they wanted to do all of this without impeding developers. Developers are super busy. They have a lot going on, lots of tight schedules. They want to make sure that there wasn't a massive overhead on developers to go and do this. So a very big, lofty goal. We partnered with them at SecureCodeWarrior, designed a training strategy and an upskilling strategy for them. And what we ended up with is we asked their developers to build this learning habit, similar to, let's say if you want to learn a new new language, how would you do it? Maybe you do a little bit of practice every single day. You learn 1 word or 2 words every day until you form that habit of doing that every single day. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's the weekday or the weekend. So we employed a similar sort of strategy. We said, look, we don't want to do a full day classroom training where we pull you away from your work for 8 hours. Imagine if you got thousands of developers, you take a day away from all of them. That's a massive drop in productivity. Just can't afford to do that. So we asked the developers to play a single challenge every single day for 3 months. A challenge on SecureCodeWarrior takes about 3 to 5 minutes, not longer. And we said, do it whenever you like. Maybe you wake up in the morning and you want to wake up your brain, or you're on your way to work on the bus or on public transport. You've got 5 minutes, go and do it then. So we've got developers to do that. As part of this process, to measure whether there was an impact, we got them to verify their skills beforehand. So have a bit of a baseline. What's the current skill level? After 3 months, what's the updated skill level after going and doing this repeated training every single day? And what we found was there was a 60% uplift in the secure development capability across the board for all of the developers. And what that really translates to for this organization is that goal that they had around not having to fix as many vulnerabilities in the late stage of the SDLC. They were able to do that. And any sort of things that did come up in that late stage, developers were able to fix it much faster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about Allstate here. So, there's many different organizations we work with. So I wonder if your tier one financial is my tier one financial on the left, but I'll steer to another industry. So the really impressive thing about Allstate is they built a really flexible yet hardened pipeline full of automation. And it includes developer training and secure by design strategies for all of their teams on a continuous basis. And all of the security testing policy and code is built into their highly automated pipelines. And so as a result of that, development teams can quickly spin up new projects. They fill out the requirements, they choose the policy they want to apply to, and they're off and running. Systems self-configure their allocated resources, say server resources, cloud resources, database resources, what have you, and they're off and running. And running through it, they have OWASP MASVS as their development and testing guides. They have NIST controls in place and all the rest of that. And so this has allowed Allstate now to be a massive innovation machine, building applications and mobile applications for themselves and for others. And they're running literally hundreds of applications through these pipelines. And they really brought together the best of all the things we've talked about today, from the upskill to the continuous testing, to the embedded remediation, to the coaching and all the rest, has allowed them to move at a highly scalable speed to meet the needs of their business. So in summary, Jaap, how would you sort of give us a couple takeaways in your part, and then I'll carry mine over.
Absolutely. So if we look at the secure by design or the developer upskilling side of things, what you'll find, and I think security people in the room will attest to this, is the relationship between application security and development has been strained. And I think we've had the best working relationship in the past, and that has led to less than favorable security outcomes. And we could keep using this hammer over and over again. So, trying to do things at the end, but they're just not going to work. So I think doing security right to left is just backwards. It's a flawed approach. So really a robust cyber resilience strategy should really look at creating a security aware workforce. And what that will translate to is those security aware developers are going to be your first line of defense as part of that strategy. Over to you, Brian.
And so when we look at the app security side, right, I think there's a handful of key elements, right? Use security standards and set a common bar, right? Just like the strained relationship is there. While you're upskilling, also set some policies that make it more efficient for all the stakeholders to operate within your functional environment. Leverage autonomous continuous security testing. There's no reason people should be doing manual testing except for extreme cases or complex configurations. Autonomous security testing has no human labor involved. It just runs in your pipelines and monitors the security processes and capabilities of the apps, finds the low-hanging fruit, automatically feeds it back, and so on and so forth. Don't test at the end, right? Test every build every day and make sure that developers get the remediation assistance they need in order to speed things along. The worst thing you can do to a developer is throw lots of false positives and no advice or context back at them. Expect them to plow their way through the false positives and try to figure out how to fix things when they don't have the skills to do it or the time to do it in the first place. And a key part of this story here is, well, it can take a village to build applications. Seek simplicity in your tools. It is possible to have highly effective pipelines with a small number of tools. Buying 200 tools to try to run your pipeline isn't necessarily as efficient. Make strategic investments in key areas like upskilling and continuous testing, and those really will have magnified multiplying effect on the speed, which ultimately helps you drive your business. So Jaap, we have some other resources folks might want. Links to these will be shared in the follow-up, but maybe you want to pick out a few to talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of assets of companies who have gone and built security-aware cultures or rolled out developer upskilling programs. So if you're interested in doing a similar sort of thing for your development organization, we've got links to these case studies. Specifically for the US, there was this executive order around cybersecurity from President Biden. So there's a white paper on that one as well. So what that could mean for your organization. He specifically called out software security and developer skills as part of that order. So super relevant when you're looking at upskilling part. And then also some of the stats that I used today were from the primary research that we did with the Evans data around shifting from reaction to prevention, what the changing face of software security looks like in 2021. So I suggest you go and look at that. And then also, if you're looking for action right now, you want to know, okay, well, great, how can we get started on this journey straight away? We also have some great assets around APIs, cloud, web, but also mobile that are free to use on our website. So you can go ahead, the OWASP mobile top 10, you can go and get your developers watching those videos to really understand the application flows there and what sort of vulnerabilities manifest themselves in their mobile applications.
Absolutely. And so I think you have an event coming up too.
Yes, so we've got the SecureCodeWarrior Dev Olympics coming up in the Cyber Awareness Month in October. So that's going to be October 19th to 20th. We're going to have 2 tracks. So we're going to have a beginner track. So if you're just getting started on your security journey as a developer, or if you're someone who's experienced, who wants to know, hey, am I the best in the world? You can come in and compete here. We're going to have different technologies. So we're going to have about 5 or 6 different technologies like mainframe, cloud, API, and then mobile. Mobile is going to be one of the tracks that we'll have. So you'll get to flex your muscle in either Java, Android, Kotlin, Android, or Swift or Objective-C, and then really see how you compare with the rest of the world.
Very good. So a couple of resources from NowSecure here as well. So depending on where you are in the spectrum, we have our top 5 mobile app security issues. If you're really interested in understanding, when I talk about 85% of apps have vulnerabilities, what are the top 5? This guide on the right actually talks to both developers and security teams. What should developers be writing and referring to and focusing on? What should security teams be testing for? If you want to build a full practice, there's there. And there's also our mobile app security cyber course. That's a quick intro, sort of mobile app sec 101, kind of get you started at a high level, and so on and so forth. So we encourage you to sign up for these. If you're into DevSecOps, we have a biweekly newsletter that has articles and news from around the internet. They're the best things that have been written that particular week or 2-week cycle on DevSecOps. We encourage you to sign up for that as well. It's a nice regular resource you find in your inbox for free. You have Dev Olympics, we have Developer Day. So about every quarter now, Secure runs a Mobile Developer Day. Thursday, September 9th will be our Developer Day. The registration information is there. You'll get links to this and to the Dev Olympics as well. This is basically 2.5 hours of our development upskilling program that our security analysts do when they're coaching clients on addressing their issues. So this is going to leverage the OWASP MASVS and other security standards, help you understand what's the right crypto to use, what are the right network libraries to use, how to do secure data storage. It's written for developers, lots of code examples for developers, and so on and so forth. And those top 5 issues that I talked about earlier are covered in depth in this. It's free to you. You get a lot of coding guidelines and resources out of it. We leverage Apple and Google documentation and resources as well. So we encourage you to sign up for this free event for those on the developer side. And so we're going to take Q&A here in just a second. I'll remind you about the Q&A tab, but it's giveaway time. Remember I said earlier, if you hang on to the end and listen carefully, we're going to give away some goodies. And so I'm going to ask two questions. We're going to start with a SecureCodeWarrior question. Please use your chat box. I'm going to attempt to get my chat box open to see if I can read it. So Earl, you want to keep an eye on this. So in the chat box, we will ask the first question. The first three people to answer the question correctly will win a prize box full of lots of goodies from SecureCodeWarrior. So it's coming that direction. So hopefully you listen carefully. What line of defense are security-aware developers? What line of defense are security-aware developers? If you remember what Jaap said, what are they? Now wait to see if we get a couple of answers. All right, chat box is available in your nav bar. I'll wait 10 more seconds and looks like Justin's a winner. So make a note, Earl, Justin will get one of our prize packages. Going to move on to the NowSecure question. I tried to run you over a truck with this, so hopefully you remember. What percentage of mobile apps in the App Store do benchmarks show have security issues? What percentage of mobile apps in the App Store do benchmarks show have security issues? It's a high number. Should anyone remember that? And there we go. We've got Justin and Vinuth. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. So that's two winners for us there. We'll go ahead and give out two, Earl, if you want to get their names down. Justin and Vinuth will be in touch with you in the background so we can know what your address is and take care of shipping you our fun stuff from today. Thank you all for participating in our little giveaway game. So we just have like a minute or two for Q&A. I'm seeing like two questions here. So I'll go ahead and Jaap and ask you the first question here. So this is actually a great one. How do you convince your development team to actually participate in training on security?
Yeah, which is a really good question. And I think probably the million-dollar question as well, to be honest, it's one of the hardest things I think you have to do. I think from a security professional's perspective, I'm guessing that's where the question's coming from, is you have to understand what the current working environment is within development. What's the level of awareness? If there is no awareness, I think that's a great way to start to do some security awareness. We have a lot of our customers that run these fun hackathons, which we call tournaments, just to introduce developers to the concept of security and go, hey, like this is how bad things can really be. That's a great way to show them that. And then also, I think it's important to tell them the why. Oftentimes, because in security, we just inherently know why we should be securing things. We often don't communicate that message down to developers. So I think it's super, super important that we actually take a step back and go, well, why? Like if I was someone who I was asking to dedicate time to this, why should I be doing this? And that really comes down to translate that in terms of their own applications, in terms of their own code bases. What are the sort of vulnerabilities that you're seeing coming out of those development teams? And then what the impact would be for them if they were to do security right from the start. I think even something as simple as, hey, this is going to build confidence with our customers, or it's going to lead us to have a better brand image or have a more stable platform. I think developers will understand those sorts of things. But even more than that, I think there's additional benefits for them as well. Just increased velocity, security not getting in the way. Those are super important as well. Like Brian mentioned, if you can automate that pipeline for them and you can say, hey, if you do these security things, whether it's continuous testing or you upskill your teams, we will not get in the way. We will not stop you for a 2-week penetration test. That's massive for them because that then means they can start to do those daily releases, which just wasn't possible before. So I think there's lots of different angles, but yeah, just understanding that, what the level of awareness is and making sure you target that and get them aware and then helping them understand the why in their own language. Those are the two main things.
Awesome. We are just about over time. I'm going to real quick answer one of the questions that I always love to answer, which is, How do developers use your tool? The good news is they don't have to. There is no tool with NowSecure to deploy to the developers. What actually happens is NowSecure runs in your pipeline. It runs plugged inside of Azure DevOps. It runs inside Jenkins and Jira and what have you, GitLab, and the list goes on and on. But what actually happens is the developer interface to NowSecure is the bug tickets that get generated through the ticketing system. So as we run autonomously in the background, we're generating those tickets with the details of what the bug is for the security bug, the evidence, the code examples, the links to learning, all of those things are actually generated into the ticket. So the developer is just consuming tickets in the same ticketing system they're using for the requirements. So whether you're a Jira Confluence shop or Azure boards or what have you, they're just going to show up like functional tickets and other QA tickets, which makes it really easy for the developers to process them. And as both Jaap and I have been saying today, it's not just throwing it over the transom, it's verified, so there's no false positive, but also includes code guidelines, examples, and links to more training so that they can quickly resolve it and increase their skill set so the bug doesn't come back later. And so with that, we are at the end of our time. On behalf of Jaap and myself and SecureCodeWarrior and NowSecure, we thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next month. We continue the DevSecOps bunch every month this year. So look forward to you coming next month. Again, we did record today's session. You'll get a copy of the session, the slides, and links to all the resources and assets that Jaap and I shared. SecureCodeWarrior and NowSecure are here to help you. It's all about the need for speed. We're here to help you win the race with your mobile app race cars. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thanks, Jaap, for joining us. Great information. Look forward to talking to you again as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for having Brian, and thank you so much to everyone for attending.
Bye now.